Sarah Mitchell's hand trembled against the glowing scanner, green light sweeping across her palm like a promise or a threat. The pneumatic hiss echoed through the library as massive locks disengaged somewhere deep in the wall, heavy metallic clunks that made her chest vibrate. Her 9-year-old daughter pressed closer to her side while her son stood rigid behind them both. And none of them knew that the 287 million waiting beyond this steel door would bring 3 dangerous men to their doorstep within weeks. That Lily's curiosity would uncover the one clue that might save their lives, or that a secret kept for 53 years was about to reshape everything they understood about family and worth. Rain hammered the mansion's windows with urgent fingers, branches scraping glass in rhythms that sounded too much like warnings. But 6 weeks earlier, Sarah Mitchell couldn't afford to buy her daughter a birthday cake that didn't come from a box. The alarm clock screamed at 4:30 in the morning, though Sarah had been awake for 20 minutes already, lying in the Nashville darkness running numbers in her head the way some people counted sheep. Rent $950, utilities $212. Groceries stretched thin enough to see through them, $300 if she was careful, $280 if she was desperate. Marcus's school fees $180. The calculator in her skull never stopped running, never let her rest, just kept adding and subtracting and coming up short every single time. She slid out of bed without turning on the light, careful not to wake Lily, who slept curled against the wall in the twin bed they shared, one small hand tucked under her cheek. Through the thin apartment walls, the neighbor's television blared an infomercial about kitchen knives that could cut through steel, the volume cranked high enough that Sarah could make out every word of the sales pitch. Above her ceiling, someone flushed a toilet, the pipes groaning and rattling. 2 floors down, a car alarm wailed for 30 seconds before cutting off mid-shriek. The November air bit cold enough to see her breath in the tiny bedroom. The heater had broken 3 weeks ago, and the landlord kept promising to fix it next week, always next week, while Sarah layered blankets and wore sweatshirts to sleep and tried not to think about what would happen when December came and the temperatures really dropped. Danny slept on the pull-out couch in what the lease generously called a living room, his 16-year-old frame too long for the sagging mattress, so his feet hung off the end. The springs creaked as he shifted in sleep. His backpack sat beside the couch, homework visible through the open zipper, because he studied by the light of his phone after Sarah went to bed, trying not to wake anyone, trying to keep his grades up while living in a place where the electricity had been shut off twice last year for late payment. The coffee maker sputtered and hissed as Sarah measured out grounds, filling their cramped kitchen with the only luxury she allowed herself. Not good coffee, not even name brand, just decent enough to make her feel human for the 2 minutes it took to drink it, standing at the counter. Her hands looked older than 34, rough and calloused and cracked from the industrial cleaning chemicals she used in the office buildings downtown. She'd rubbed lotion into them last night, but already the skin felt tight and dry, the knuckles red and angry. Outside the window, Nashville was still dark, the city breathing softly before the chaos of the day. Sarah pulled on her coat and grabbed her keys. She'd walk the 8 blocks to the bus stop because paying for parking downtown cost more than she made in an hour of cleaning toilets. The stairs down from the 4th floor seemed steeper every morning, her knees protesting by the second landing, her back already starting to ache in that deep, persistent way that never really went away anymore. The warehouse shift started at 9, but Sarah had to clock in at the office building by 5, which meant leaving the apartment by 4:40 to catch the first bus. She scrubbed toilets for people who made more in a week than she made in a year, emptied trash cans filled with half-eaten lunches from restaurants she couldn't afford to walk past, polished conference room tables where men in suits made decisions that would never benefit anyone like her. By 8:30, she'd be running for the second bus to the warehouse, gulping coffee from a travel mug that leaked, changing into the warehouse uniform in a bathroom stall because there was no time to go home. The warehouse sprawled across 3 blocks of industrial Nashville, all concrete and steel, and the constant beeping of forklifts backing up. Sarah pushed through the employee entrance at 8:59, clocking in with 1 minute to spare. The supervisor's office sat elevated above the floor, windows looking down on the workers like a prison guard tower. Richard Voss stood at those windows now, arms crossed, watching the floor with the expression of a man who enjoyed reminding people of their place in the world. Sarah kept her head down and headed for her station. She'd been loading boxes for 3 years, scanning labels, moving inventory from one steel shelf to another in an endless loop that made her shoulders burn and her mind go numb. The fluorescent lights overhead hummed with a frequency that gave her headaches by noon. The concrete floor was unforgiving, every step sending little shocks of pain through her worn-out sneakers. Richard's voice cut across the warehouse floor before she'd made it 10 feet. His boots hit the metal stairs with deliberate heaviness, each step announcing his descent. The words came loud enough for half the floor to hear. "You got a minute, Mitchell?" Sarah's stomach clenched. She turned slowly, keeping her face neutral. "Yes, sir." Richard Voss was 52 and had spent 30 years climbing from warehouse floor to supervisor, a journey that had convinced him he'd earned the right to look down on everyone still doing the work he used to do. His face had the particular smugness of small power, wielded without restraint. He stopped 3 feet away, close enough that Sarah could smell the cigarette smoke clinging to his clothes. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Heard from Janice you've been talking about maybe buying a house someday? That's cute, real cute." Sarah's face burned, but she kept her voice level. "Just talk, Mr. Voss. Just wondering what it might take." Richard's laugh had edges. "What it might take? I'll tell you what it takes, Mitchell. It takes not working a warehouse job. It takes not having 3 kids from different fathers." She had 2 children, both from the same man who died in a construction accident when Lily was 2 months old. But Richard knew that and said it anyway because accuracy didn't matter when you had power and the person you were talking to had none. The correction tried to climb out of her throat, but Sarah swallowed it back down. She needed this job. Danny needed new shoes. Lily had a school field trip next week that cost $40 she didn't have yet. "I have 2 children, she said quietly. "Same father. He passed away." Richard waved this away like a fly. "Whatever. Point is, people like you don't buy houses, Mitchell. You rent. You stay where you belong. Stop dreaming above your station." 2 workers at the next station over had stopped to listen. Sarah saw them exchange glances, one of them hiding a smile. The humiliation crawled across her skin like insects. "I understand, Mr. Voss." She forced the words out through clenched teeth. Richard leaned in slightly, dropping his voice to something almost conspiratorial, but still loud enough for nearby ears. "You want some advice? Free of charge? Stop wasting your time on fantasies. You're 34 years old working 3 jobs just to keep your head above water. Houses are for people with futures, not people just trying to survive. You get that?" The forklift behind them beeped in reverse. Boxes crashed somewhere across the warehouse. Richard's laugh echoed off concrete walls as he turned away, already dismissing her, already moving on to exert his petty power somewhere else. Sarah stood frozen for 5 seconds that felt like 5 hours. Then she walked to her station and started scanning boxes, blinking hard against the burning in her eyes, moving inventory from shelf to shelf with mechanical precision, while her face stayed hot and her hands stayed steady and every muscle in her body stayed tight with swallowed rage. The warehouse shift ran until 6. Sarah clocked out and caught the bus home, standing in the aisle because all the seats were full, holding the overhead rail while the bus lurched through evening traffic. She got home at 7:15 to find Danny at the kitchen table, surrounded by textbooks, and Lily on the floor with construction paper and markers, drawing something that involved a lot of purple. Lily looked up with that smile that could break Sarah's heart and put it back together in the same instant. "Hi, Mommy. Guess what day it is tomorrow?" Sarah's exhaustion lifted just slightly. She crossed the tiny space and kissed the top of Lily's head. "Let me think. Could it be someone's 9th birthday?" Lily bounced on her knees. "It's mine. I'm going to be 9. Danny glanced up from his calculus homework, something careful in his eyes. "Mom," I was thinking, "about tomorrow we could just do something simple, you know? Like maybe go to the park or something. Lily doesn't need a big thing." But Lily's face had already fallen slightly. That lightning-fast transition children make between joy and disappointment that they try so hard to hide. Her voice stayed bright, but Sarah heard the wobble underneath. "The park would be fun. Parks are great." Sarah looked at her daughter, then at her son, who was trying to save his mother from spending money she didn't have, and made a decision she'd probably regret. "We're having a party. Small one, just us. But it counts." After Lily went to bed that night, Sarah counted the money in her wallet. $23.16 until her office cleaning check cleared on Friday. Tomorrow was Thursday. She needed gas for the weekend diner shift. She needed to put something aside for the electric bill. But it was Lily's 9th birthday and the kid hadn't asked for anything all year. Hadn't complained about their tiny apartment or her secondhand clothes or the fact that she shared a bed with her mother because there was no other option. The dollar store opened at 8. Sarah skipped the office cleaning shift, called in sick for the first time in 18 months, knowing it would probably cost her a lecture about reliability, and took Lily to school like always, then walked the 12 blocks to the dollar store because the bus cost $2 each way that she couldn't spare. The fluorescent lights inside made everything look slightly poisonous. Sarah walked the aisles with her mental calculator running. Plastic tiara, $3. Small cake mix, $4. Candles, $2. Streamers, $1. Paper plates, $1. That left $12 for rent and gas and everything else. She stood in the checkout line behind a woman buying actual birthday decorations from the party store down the street, the kind that cost more than Sarah's entire grocery budget, and felt something small and hard settle in her chest. The cashier was 17 and looked bored. She rang up Sarah's items without making eye contact, bagged them in thin plastic. Back home, Sarah mixed the cake batter in their one good bowl and poured it into a pan that had lost its non-stick coating 2 years ago. While it baked, she found Danny in his room, the closet, really, that the landlord had designated a second bedroom, just big enough for a twin mattress and a plastic storage drawer. His voice was quiet. "You didn't have to do this, Mom." "Yes, I did. She doesn't care about having things, you know. Lily's not like other kids, I know. But she shouldn't have to be different from other kids just because we're broke." Danny looked up at her with eyes that were too old for 16, eyes that had seen his mother work herself to exhaustion for years, that knew exactly how much everything cost and what sacrifices were being made. "I got a job." Sarah's chest constricted. "What?" "Grocery store on 5th, stocking shelves. 20 hours a week. I start Monday." The protest rose automatically. "No, baby, no. Your job is school." "Mom, I can do both. I already talked to my guidance counselor. She said as long as I keep my grades up." "I said no, Danny. School is how you get out of this." Her hands swept the tiny apartment, the thin walls, the broken heater. "This is temporary for you. You're going to college. You're going to have a real career. You don't throw that away for 20 hours a week at a grocery store." His jaw set in a way that reminded Sarah painfully of his father. "We need the money. We'll figure it out. We always do." That night they ate dinner early, spaghetti with sauce from a jar, salad from a bag that was starting to wilt, and then Sarah brought out the cake with 9 candles blazing. She'd found the plastic tiara in the dollar store bag and balanced it on Lily's head. Danny had drawn birthday pictures all over construction paper and taped them to the walls, crude but colorful, balloons and presents, and stick figures that were supposed to be the 3 of them. Lily's face when she saw it all made every dollar feel worth it. She wore the plastic tiara like it was genuine crystal and ate her slice of box cake like it was something from a bakery. "This is the best birthday ever," she announced, and Sarah knew she was lying, knew that Lily had heard the birthday party happening next door last week, the kid with the bouncy castle and the catered food and the pile of presents that took an hour to open. Danny seemed to know it too. He leaned close while Lily was examining her construction paper crown. "Mom, she's just saying that to make you feel better." "I know. But let me believe it tonight, okay?" Through the wall, they could hear the television from the other apartment, then children's laughter, then a woman's voice calling someone to dinner. Normal sounds from a normal family that could afford normal things. Lily's smile stayed bright and fixed and heartbreaking. The next morning, Sarah was pulling a double, office cleaning at 5, warehouse at 9, when she found the envelope taped to her apartment door. Heavy cream paper, expensive looking, the kind of envelope that felt substantial in your hands. Her first thought was eviction notice and her stomach dropped toward her feet. But eviction notices didn't come in stationery that probably cost more than her monthly utility bill. She peeled it off carefully and carried it inside. Danny had already left for school and Lily was still asleep. Sarah stood in the kitchen and opened the envelope with fingers that shook slightly. The letterhead read, Thomas Bradford and Associates, Estate Attorneys, Atlanta, Georgia. Sarah had to read the first line 3 times before the words made sense. Dear Miss Mitchell, we are writing to inform you that you have been named as the sole beneficiary in the estate of Eleanor Mitchell, deceased as of October 3rd of this year. Sarah sat down hard on one of their mismatched kitchen chairs. Eleanor Mitchell, her grandmother, a woman she hadn't seen since she was 7 years old, hadn't thought about in years because thinking about her meant thinking about her mother Rita, who died 5 years ago from cancer, and thinking about Rita meant remembering all the questions Sarah had never gotten to ask about why they'd been cut off from Eleanor in the first place. As executor of Miss Mitchell's will, we are required to notify you of your inheritance, which includes real property located in Fitzgerald, Georgia. We request your presence at our offices at your earliest convenience to discuss the terms of the inheritance and transfer of deed. Real property. That meant land, maybe a house. Sarah's first thought was, how much are the back taxes? Her second thought was, this is probably a scam. Her third thought was the memory of being 6 or 7 years old, sitting on a kitchen counter somewhere, while a woman with kind eyes and gentle hands gave her a piece of crystallized ginger. Just a tiny bite, the woman had said, her voice warm and musical. It's strong, but it's good for you. Sarah had made a face and the woman had laughed, and that laugh had been full of light and love. And then Sarah's mother had appeared in the doorway with her face tight and angry, and that was the last clear memory Sarah had of Eleanor Mitchell. She sat at the kitchen table reading the letter over and over until she heard Lily stirring in the bedroom. Then she folded it carefully and slipped it back into the envelope and tried to figure out what to do with information that felt both impossible and inevitable, like her life was a story that had been written a long time ago, and she was just now getting around to reading the next chapter. At the warehouse that afternoon, Richard Voss was waiting by her station. His smile had teeth in it. Mitchell, heard through the grapevine you had to call in sick this morning. Hope everything's okay. Sarah kept her face neutral. Just needed to handle some personal business, Mr. Voss. Personal business. His voice made the words sound vaguely dirty. Must be nice being able to just take time off whenever you feel like it. Some of us have to actually show up to work. 3 other workers within earshot, all of them pretending not to listen while hanging on every word. Sarah felt her face heat. I apologize for the inconvenience, Mr. Voss. It won't happen again. See that it doesn't. He started to walk away, then stopped and turned back as if struck by sudden thought. Oh, hey, didn't you mention something about property in Georgia? What was that about? Sarah's stomach clenched. She hadn't mentioned it to anyone. Janice must have overheard her on the phone with the attorney's office during her braying. Just some family matter I need to look into. Richard's eyebrows rose in theatrical surprise. Family matter? He raised his voice slightly, making sure everyone could hear. Hey everybody, Mitchell here is dealing with some family property in Georgia. Sounds pretty fancy, doesn't it? 2 workers nearby exchanged glances. One of them smirked. Sarah wanted to disappear into the concrete floor. Richard warmed to his theme, sensing an audience. What kind of property we talking about, Mitchell? Mansion? Estate? Maybe a nice plantation house? It's just property, Mr. Voss. Probably nothing. His laugh echoed off the warehouse ceiling. Probably nothing. That's right. Probably some shack in the woods with holes in the roof, rats in the walls. That's more your speed, isn't it? The smirking worker laughed out loud. Sarah's hands curled into fists at her sides, but she kept them there, kept her voice level. I really need to get back to work, Mr. Voss. Richard stepped closer, his voice dropping to something that might have sounded sympathetic to anyone who didn't know better. Look, Mitchell, I'm going to give you some real talk here. Whatever you're imagining about this Georgia property, whatever little fantasy you've built up in your head, let it go. People like you don't inherit mansions. You inherit problems. Debt, tax liens, places that cost more to tear down than they're worth. His hand landed on her shoulder, heavy and condescending. Stop playing pretend and just do your job. That's what you're good at. Sarah Mitchell stood in the Nashville warehouse with fluorescent lights humming overhead and concrete under her feet and Richard Voss's hand on her shoulder like a brand. And something small and hard in her chest decided that even if the Georgia property turned out to be exactly what Richard said, a shack with holes and rats and nothing but problems, she was going to look at it anyway. She was going to take her kids and drive down there and walk through whatever her grandmother had left her. And if it was worthless, that was fine. But at least she'd know. At least she'd have tried. Yes, Mr. Voss, she said quietly. I understand. 2 weeks later, Sarah called in for 3 days of unpaid leave from all three jobs, threw clothes for herself and both kids into garbage bags because they didn't own suitcases, and spent her carefully hoarded emergency fund on a rental car. $180 for 3 days, which meant they were eating peanut butter sandwiches for dinner all next week, but Danny and Lily didn't complain when she told them. Danny just nodded seriously and started packing. Lily bounced on her toes and asked if they were going on an adventure. The drive from Nashville to Fitzgerald, Georgia took 6 hours with stops. Sarah white-knuckled the steering wheel while Danny rode shotgun with the printed Google Maps directions because the rental didn't have GPS and Sarah's phone data plan couldn't handle navigation. Lily sat in back with a library book and a pack of colored pencils, drawing pictures of what she imagined the house would look like. Always a castle, always with towers and flags and gardens full of flowers. They drove through Tennessee into Georgia, the highway cutting through endless pine forests and small towns that looked like they'd been holding their breath since the 70s. The sky overhead started clear and blue, but clouds gathered as they got closer, darkening by degrees until the sunlight looked filtered through dirty glass. Lily pressed her face to the window. Mommy, why did you never meet your grandma? Sarah glanced in the rearview mirror. I did meet her when I was little, but then we stopped seeing her. Why? I don't know, baby. My mom never really explained it. Danny turned in his seat to look at his sister. Sometimes adults have fights and stop talking to each other. It's dumb, but it happens. Did great-grandma do something bad? Sarah's chest tightened. I don't think so. I think maybe it was complicated in ways I didn't understand when I was a kid. The GPS on Danny's phone, he'd turned on data for just this trip, eating into next month's allowance, directed them off the highway onto progressively smaller roads. 4-lane highway became 2-lane county road, became cracked asphalt that gave way to gravel that crunched under the rental's tires. Trees closed in on both sides, branches reaching overhead to form a tunnel of green shadow that made the afternoon seem darker than it was. A weathered sign appeared on the right. Private property. No trespassing. Violators will be prosecuted. The paint had faded until the words were barely legible, but the intent was clear enough. Lily sat forward in her seat. It's like in the stories. Like Sleeping Beauty's castle hidden in the forest. Danny's voice carried caution. Lil, don't get your hopes up too high, okay? It might not be what you're imagining. But it could be, Lily insisted. It could be exactly like the stories. The driveway seemed to go on forever, winding through the trees, gravel popping under the tires, branches scraping the sides of the car with sounds like fingernails on metal. Sarah's hands ached from gripping the wheel. Her lower back had started that deep, persistent throb that meant she'd been sitting too long without the right support. The sun broke through the clouds for a moment, sending shafts of golden light down through the leaves. And then the trees opened up. The mansion rose in front of them, like something from another century. 3 stories of stone and timber, ivy climbing the walls and thick ropes of green. Windows tall enough to walk through, though several of them showed spiderwebs of broken glass. The wraparound porch sagged in places, and one of the columns had split vertically, held together by what looked like a temporary metal brace. The roof dipped in the middle like a horse's swayback. Weeds and wildflowers had conquered the lawn in an explosion of uncontrolled growth. But even in its decay, even with nature trying to take it back, the mansion was magnificent. Sarah stopped the car and just stared. Her brain couldn't reconcile what she was seeing with any version of reality that made sense. People like her, people who worked 3 jobs and lived in apartments with broken heaters and thin walls, didn't have grandmothers who left them places like this. This was a mistake. Had to be a mistake. Some clerical error that would be corrected any moment. Someone would call and explain that the real heir was someone else. Someone who belonged in a place like this. Danny's voice came out barely above a whisper. Holy hell. Language, Sarah said automatically, but her own voice sounded distant and strange. Lily had her face pressed to the window, eyes wide as dinner plates. It's real. Mommy, it's a real castle. They got out of the car slowly, feet crunching on the gravel drive. The November air smelled like pine and earth and something older, like layers of time compressed into a scent. Birds called from the trees, not city birds, but deep forest sounds that Sarah didn't recognize. Wind moved through the overgrown bushes that had probably once been carefully shaped hedges, rustling leaves and whispers that sounded almost like voices. Sarah approached the front steps with Lily holding her hand tight and Danny walking slightly ahead like he could protect them from whatever they found inside. The wood groaned under Sarah's weight, but held. The double doors were locked with a heavy padlock that looked relatively new, shiny steel against the weathered wood. The lawyer said he'd leave a key. Sarah's voice sounded too loud in the quiet. Danny checked around the door frame, running his hands along the wood, then reached up to a loose shutter hanging at an angle. Found it. He pulled out a manila envelope, slightly damp from weather but intact. Inside was a single brass key and a letter on the same heavy cream paper as the envelope that had come to Sarah's apartment. Her grandmother's handwriting, precise, careful, the script of someone who'd been taught penmanship as a serious subject in school. Sarah's hands shook as she unfolded it. The letter was short. Sarah, if you're reading this, then I'm gone and you found your way here. I'm sorry I wasn't part of your life. Your mother had her reasons for keeping us apart, and I respected them even though it broke my heart. This house, this land, it holds more than you can imagine. More than just memories. I spent 53 years taking care of this place, taking care of the man who owned it, and keeping secrets that aren't mine to tell in writing. Walk through these rooms, pay attention, look closely. Someone who knew me will find you, trust him. Your grandmother who loved you always, even from a distance. Eleanor. Sarah read it twice, then handed it to Danny, who read it with his eyebrows drawing together. Who's the him we're supposed to trust? I don't know. Lily tugged on Sarah's sleeve. Can we go inside now? Sarah took the brass key and fitted it into the padlock. The lock opened with a solid click that echoed across the porch. She removed it and pushed against the door. It didn't budge. Danny added his weight and the door groaned, wood scraping against wood, rust flaking off hinges, and then it swung inward with a sound like something waking up after a very long sleep. Dust exploded into the afternoon light, illuminated particles dancing and swirling in the sudden draft. The smell hit them like a wall, old wood and decay and mildew, but underneath something else, something that might have been perfume or cologne from decades past, still clinging to the walls like a ghost refusing to leave. Sarah stepped inside first. The foyer was enormous, the ceiling 2 stories overhead, a grand staircase sweeping upward before splitting into 2 directions on a landing, dominated by a massive stained glass window. Even covered in grime, the window was beautiful, depicting mountains and a river, and a setting sun in colors that would probably be stunning if anyone cleaned them. The hardwood floors had warped in places from water damage. Furniture sat covered in white sheets, their shapes suggesting chairs and tables, and things Sarah couldn't identify, all of it looking like an army of ghosts standing at attention. To the left, an archway led into what must have been a living room. To the right, a formal dining room with a table long enough to seat 20 people. Everything was frozen, time stopped and preserved. A calendar on the wall showed July 1988. Mail sat in a pile on a side table, envelopes yellowed with age. A pair of reading glasses rested on top of a book, as if someone had just set them down and stepped away for a moment and never came back. Lily's voice echoed in the huge space. It's like a museum. Sarah moved deeper into the house, Danny and Lily following close. The living room held leather furniture that had probably cost a fortune when it was new. A stone fireplace you could stand up inside, walls lined with bookshelves. Gold records hung in frames. Photographs covered every available surface. Kenny Rogers with celebrities whose faces Sarah recognized from her parents' generation, with politicians, with ordinary people who must have been friends or family. And in so many of the photos, standing slightly to the side, never in the center but always present, was an Asian woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile that Sarah recognized even though decades had passed. Her grandmother, Eleanor. Danny called from near the fireplace. Mom, look at this. A framed photograph sat on the mantel, bigger than the others. Kenny Rogers in this very room, guitar in his lap, and standing behind him with her hand on his shoulder was Eleanor. She looked happy, proud. Like she belonged here, like this house and this man and this life were hers in some fundamental way that had nothing to do with ownership and everything to do with care. Sarah picked up the frame, wiped dust from the glass with her sleeve. Her grandmother's face smiled out at her across the years, across all the questions that would never get answered, across the distance that Rita had enforced and never explained. They explored for hours. The house seemed endless, rooms leading to more rooms, hallways connecting to other hallways, spaces that served purposes Sarah could only guess at. A library with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and leather-bound first editions that probably cost more than Sarah made in a year. A music room with a grand piano and guitars hanging on the walls, and recording equipment that looked state-of-the-art for whatever era it came from. A kitchen that must have been magnificent once, with commercial-grade appliances and a breakfast nook overlooking what had been gardens but were now wild tangles of growth. Upstairs, the bedrooms multiplied. The master suite took up an entire wing, four-poster bed, sitting area, bathroom with a marble tub the size of a small swimming pool. Guest rooms decorated with different themes, Western and nautical and sports memorabilia. At the end of a hallway, they found a smaller room, simpler than the others, and Sarah knew instantly this had been Eleanor's. The bed was neatly made with a handmade quilt. On the nightstand sat a photograph in a simple frame, a young woman holding a baby. Sarah's breath caught. The woman was Rita, her mother, probably 20 years old. The baby was Sarah herself. Danny stood beside her looking at the photo. This was her room, Grandma Eleanor's. Sarah nodded, unable to speak around the tightness in her throat. The room was modest, almost austere compared to the rest of the house. Eleanor had lived here in this small space while maintaining this massive mansion, had slept in this narrow bed and kept this single photograph of the granddaughter she wasn't allowed to see, and Sarah felt grief for a relationship that had never gotten the chance to exist. Lily found a trunk at the foot of the bed. "Can we open it?" Sarah knelt beside her daughter and lifted the lid. Inside were more photographs, letters bundled with string, newspaper clippings about Kenny Rogers' career, and a journal with a leather cover worn soft from handling. Sarah opened the journal carefully. The pages were brittle with age. The first entry was dated March 15th, 1992. She read aloud, her voice breaking slightly. "Kenny came back from his tour today. He looked tired. I made him his favorite soup, and he told me stories about the road. He asked about my granddaughter again. I showed him the school photo Rita sent. He said she has beautiful eyes just like mine. It breaks my heart that Sarah doesn't know me. But Rita made her choice and I have to respect it, even if it kills me." The sun was setting by the time they finished exploring the main floors. They hadn't even touched the basement yet, or the various outbuildings visible through the windows. Sarah stood in the foyer again, looking up at the stained glass window, now illuminated by the dying light outside, casting colors across the dusty floor in patterns that looked almost alive. Lily tugged her sleeve. "Mommy, what are you thinking?" "I'm thinking this is impossible. I'm thinking there's no way I can afford to keep this place. The taxes alone would destroy us. The repairs would cost hundreds of thousands, maybe millions." She turned in a slow circle, taking it all in. "But I'm also thinking my grandmother spent most of her life here, that she wanted me to have it, and I need to understand why before I let it go." Danny's voice was quiet. "So what do? We come back tomorrow with flashlights and really look at this place. We figure out what it's worth, what it would take to sell it, and..." A sound echoed through the house, deep and low, coming from somewhere below them. A creak of old wood, or something heavier. They all froze. Lily's whisper was tiny. "What was that?" "Old house settling," Sarah said, trying to sound confident even as her heart started racing. Another creak, louder this time. Then what sounded distinctly like a door closing somewhere in the depths of the mansion. Danny's hand found Sarah's arm. "Mom, I don't think we're alone." Sarah grabbed Lily and pulled her close. The sun had set faster than she'd realized, and shadows filled the house now. Corners growing dark. Doorways becoming mouths that could hide anything. She fumbled for her phone, turning on the flashlight. Its beam looked pathetically small in all this darkness. "Let's go." Her voice came out steady despite everything. "We'll come back tomorrow with proper lights." They headed for the front door, moving quickly but trying not to run. Sarah's hand was on the door handle when she heard it clearly. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming from the hallway to their right. Heavy boots on hardwood, getting closer. Sarah yanked the door open and they tumbled out onto the porch, gasping in the cool evening air. Behind them, the house stood silent and dark, keeping whatever secrets it held for another day. The rental car had never looked so welcoming. Sarah got Lily into the back seat, Danny into the front, then stood for a moment looking back at the mansion. It loomed against the darkening sky, windows like empty eyes, the broken column on the porch making it look wounded and vulnerable, and somehow menacing all at once. A light appeared in one of the upstairs windows. Not electric light. This looked like a flashlight beam, moving slowly across the glass. Then it was gone. Sarah got in the car and locked the doors. She started the engine with shaking hands. "We're coming back tomorrow, in full daylight, with flashlights and maybe a baseball bat." Danny laughed nervously. "You really think this place is worth it?" Sarah looked back at the mansion one more time, at the stone walls that had sheltered her grandmother for over 50 years, at the history contained in those rooms, at the mystery Eleanor's letter had hinted at. Somewhere in there were answers, and maybe, just maybe, the key to changing their lives. "Yeah," she said softly, "I really do." They drove back down the long gravel driveway, branches scraping the car like hands trying to pull them back. Sarah checked the rearview mirror compulsively, but the mansion disappeared behind the trees within a minute, swallowed by the forest as if it had never existed at all. Lily fell asleep in the back seat within 10 miles, her head against the window, one hand still clutching the plastic tiara from her birthday. Danny stared out at the darkening Georgia landscape and didn't say much. Sarah's mind kept running calculations she didn't have the numbers for. Property taxes, repair costs, what it might sell for even in this condition. Whether any of it mattered or if the whole thing would turn out to be exactly what Richard Voss had predicted. More problems than possibilities. More debt than deliverance. But underneath the practical concerns was something else. Something that felt almost dangerous in how much she wanted it to be real. The chance that her grandmother had left her something that mattered. The hope that there might be a way out of the grinding exhaustion that had defined her adult life. The possibility that Lily and Danny could have something better than thin walls and broken heaters and birthdays celebrated with dollar store cake. They found a budget motel 20 miles from Fitzgerald, $43 a night, and Sarah counted out the cash carefully. 2 nights here, plus gas for tomorrow, plus food, meant they were eating ramen for the next week. But they'd manage. They always managed. The motel room smelled like industrial cleaning products that Sarah recognized from work. The same brand she used to scrub office toilets. 2 double beds with sagging mattresses and comforters that were clean but worn thin. Danny took one bed and passed out almost immediately. Sarah and Lily shared the other. Lily curled against her mother's side the way she had when she was small, before she'd gotten too old and proud to need that kind of closeness. "Mommy," Lily whispered in the dark. "Did you see her? In the house? See who, baby?" "Great-grandma. She was there, I think. In her room. I felt like she wanted to tell us something." Sarah stroked her daughter's hair. "Houses don't have ghosts, Lil. Just memories." Lily was quiet for a moment. In the stories, sometimes the ghosts are trying to help. Sometimes they have secrets they need to tell before they can rest. "What kind of stories are you reading?" "The good kind." Sarah almost laughed. "Go to sleep, baby girl. Tomorrow we'll figure out what great-grandma left us." But she lay awake for a long time after Lily's breathing evened out into sleep, staring at the water-stained ceiling and thinking about footsteps in an empty house, about a light in an upstairs window that couldn't have been there, about Eleanor's letter saying someone who knew her would find them. The rational part of Sarah's brain said they'd imagined the sounds, that old houses settled and made noises, that the light had been their own flashlights reflecting off glass. The rest of her wasn't so sure. They returned to the mansion the next morning, armed with flashlights, a crowbar Sarah had bought at a gas station, and a determination that felt stronger than fear. The November morning was crisp and clear, sunlight making everything look less ominous. But as they drove up the long driveway again, Sarah's hands tightened on the steering wheel. The house looked different in daylight, less haunted, more sad, like an abandoned cathedral slowly being reclaimed by nature. They parked in the same spot, This time when they approached the front door, Sarah noticed things she'd missed in her shock yesterday. Good bones underneath the decay. Craftsmanship in the stonework that must have cost a fortune. Details in the carved wood trim that spoke of a time when people built things to last. The door stood slightly ajar. Sarah stopped. I locked this yesterday. I know I did. Danny moved in front of her. Stay behind me. You're 16, Sarah started to say, but Danny was already pushing the door open slowly, flooding the foyer with morning light. The house looked exactly as they'd left it. Dust undisturbed on the floors, furniture still covered in sheets. Nothing moved or taken or changed. But Sarah's skin prickled with the certainty that someone had been here. The air felt different, like someone had just walked through a room moments before they entered. They moved through the first floor methodically this time. Living room, dining room, kitchen, library. Sarah found more letters in the library, bundled with string and organized by year. Most were business correspondence, contracts and royalty statements, letters from record labels and concert promoters. But tucked between the formal documents were handwritten notes on personal stationery. One dated April 9th, 1987, stopped Sarah cold. She read it aloud for Danny and Lily. Lorraine, I don't know what I'd do without you. Everyone else wants something from me. You just want me to be okay. Thank you for the soup, for the quiet, for reminding me that home isn't a place on a map. It's wherever you feel understood. You understand me better than most. Kenny. Another from December 24th, 1993. Lorraine, spending Christmas here instead of on the road was the best decision I made all year. Watching you decorate this house, hearing you hum while you cooked, it reminded me why I bought this place. Not for the privacy or the peace, but because you made it feel like it mattered. You make everything matter. Merry Christmas, my friend. Kenny. Sarah's hands trembled. These weren't notes from an employer to an employee. These were messages between friends, between two people who'd built something meaningful over decades of proximity and trust. Lily was exploring the far end of the library, running her small hands along the book spines. This one's weird. Sarah looked up. What do you mean, baby? The what wall? This part isn't as deep as the other walls. See, Lily demonstrated, spreading her arms to show the difference in depth between the east wall of bookshelves and the others. Sarah crossed to where Lily stood. Her daughter was right. The built-in bookcase on the east side was at least 2 feet shallower than it should have been, given the room's dimensions. Danny, come look at this. Her son measured with his eyes, walked the perimeter, knocked on the wall behind the books. Hollow. There's space back there. They started examining the bookcase systematically, pulling books out at random, running their hands along the edges of shelves, looking for anything that didn't belong. It was Lily who found it, a leather-bound copy of The Gambler by Kenny Rogers, published in 1994. When she pulled on it, instead of sliding out, the entire book tilted forward like a lever. Something clicked deep in the wall. A section of the bookcase about 4 feet wide swung inward with a whisper of well-oiled hinges that shouldn't have existed in a house that had been abandoned for years. Behind the bookcase was a steel door, modern and completely out of place with the mansion's aesthetic. A small panel glowed softly beside it, green light pulsing like a heartbeat. Sarah and Danny and Lily stood frozen, staring at what shouldn't be there but was. Above the panel, engraved in the steel, were words in Eleanor's precise script, for Eleanor and hers. Lily's voice came out awed and delighted. It's real. It's like the stories. A secret treasure. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. This can't be real. This is like something from a movie. Danny stepped closer to the panel. It's a scanner, for handprints or fingerprints. Sarah approached slowly. The panel looked sophisticated, the kind of technology that costs serious money to install. The green light swept across the surface in a steady rhythm. For Eleanor and hers, for Eleanor and hers. Try it, Danny urged. Touch the scanner. What if it's alarmed? What if the police come? Mom, the lawyer gave you the key. You legally own this place. You're not breaking in. You're exploring your own property. Sarah took a breath and placed her right hand on the scanner. The green light swept across her palm, reading her fingerprints and palm lines and God knew what else. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the panel beeped 3 times. The massive steel door gave a pneumatic hiss that filled the library. Locks disengaged with a series of heavy clunks, metal sliding against metal, bolts retracting. The door swung open smoothly on hinges that couldn't have been original, revealing darkness beyond. Sarah aimed her flashlight inside. The beam illuminated a small room, maybe 10 feet by 10 feet, with metal shelves lining 3 walls. The air inside smelled different, dry and climate-controlled, nothing like the rest of the mansion's dusty decay. Sarah stepped through the doorway with Danny and Lily close behind, their flashlight beams cutting through the darkness to reveal metal shelves organized with meticulous precision. Boxes sat labeled in Eleanor's neat handwriting. Folders stood upright in careful rows, everything arranged like a filing system, like someone had spent years making sure this would all make sense to whoever found it. Sarah approached the nearest shelf and picked up a manila folder. Property deeds and titles was written across the tab in black ink. Inside were documents showing ownership of multiple properties, the Georgia estate they stood in, a condo in Nashville with an address Sarah didn't recognize, a beach house in Destin, Florida, a ranch outside Austin, Texas, all in Eleanor Mitchell's name, all transferred from Kenny Rogers between 2010 and 2016. Her voice came out strangled. My grandmother owned all of these. Danny had found another folder. Insurance policies, life insurance, property insurance, casualty insurance. He flipped through pages, his eyes getting wider. Mom, these are all paid in full, and they all list you as beneficiary. The total value across all of them, it's $750,000. That can't be right. Sarah's knees felt weak. Let me see. But the documents were clear. Standard insurance forms, official letterhead, policy numbers that could be verified. $750,000 waiting in various accounts, dormant since Eleanor's death 6 weeks ago. Lily had discovered a lockbox on a lower shelf. It was small but heavy, the kind banks use for safe deposit boxes. She tried to lift it. Mommy, this one's locked too. Danny found the key taped to the underside of the shelf, a small brass key on a piece of masking tape. He opened the lockbox while Sarah watched over his shoulder, her heart doing strange things in her chest. Inside were bundles of cash. New hundreds still wrapped in bank bands, stack after stack, filling the box. Danny counted quickly, his hands shaking slightly. Mom, there's at least $50,000 here. Maybe more. Sarah had to sit down on the concrete floor. This isn't real. People like us don't find rooms full of money and property deeds and insurance policies. This doesn't happen. But it was happening. The evidence sat in her hands, real and solid and impossible to deny. Eleanor had accumulated wealth over decades, had organized it carefully, had set everything up to pass to Sarah. The question wasn't whether it was real. The question was, how much more was there, because this vault room was small and clearly meant to store documents, not the full extent of whatever Eleanor had left behind. Danny moved deeper into the space. Mom, there's another door back here. At the rear of the document vault stood a smaller door, older looking than the steel entrance, with a combination lock that belonged in a museum of mechanical engineering. Taped to the door was an envelope with Sarah's name written in Eleanor's handwriting. Sarah stood on legs that felt made of water. She crossed to the door and peeled off the envelope with fingers that had gone numb. Inside was a single piece of paper with 4 numbers written in the center, 33 of 17, 41, 9. Below the numbers, Eleanor had written, "These numbers are for you, Sarah. Everything beyond this door is yours. I earned it honestly and I give it freely. Use it wisely. Use it kindly. Let it free you the way it could never free me. I love you. I always did. Grandma Eleanor." Sarah's vision blurred. She pressed the paper to her chest and let herself cry for 30 seconds. Big gasping sobs that came from somewhere deep and broken. And then she wiped her eyes and looked at her children, who were watching her with expressions that mixed hope and fear and confusion. Let's see what she left us. Danny approached the combination lock. The dial was brass, worn smooth from use but still functional. 33 right. The dial clicked as he turned it, each number falling into place with mechanical certainty. 17 left, 41 right, 9 left. The lock disengaged with a sound like a sigh. Danny pulled the handle and the door swung open on hinges that moved smoothly despite their obvious age. Sarah aimed her flashlight through the doorway. The beam revealed a larger room, roughly 20 feet square. But instead of shelves with documents, the walls were lined with safety deposit boxes built directly into the structure. Dozens of them, maybe more, each with a small brass key hanging from its lock. In the center of the room stood a table with a leather journal resting on its surface. A single lamp beside it that couldn't have power running to it, but stood there anyway like a promise or a memorial. Sarah stepped inside first. The air here felt different too, preserved somehow, like a time capsule waiting to be opened. She approached the table and picked up the journal carefully. The leather was soft with age, the pages thick and cream-colored. She opened to the first entry. January 5th, 2017. Eleanor's handwriting filled the page in careful lines. Sarah will never read this while I'm alive. My pride won't allow it, and Rita's anger won't permit it. But someday when I'm gone, maybe she'll understand. Kenny gave me more than a job. He gave me security, respect, and eventually a fortune I never asked for but earned through 53 years of loyalty. These boxes contain that fortune. I've organized everything, documented everything. I want her to know that a woman like me, an immigrant's daughter with a ninth-grade education, built something that matters. Not through luck, but through dedication. This is my legacy. This is my apology for all the years I couldn't be part of her life. This is my hope for her future. Danny's voice was barely a whisper. How much do you think is in here? I don't know. Sarah looked at the rows of safety deposit boxes, trying to count them and losing track. 30? 40? Each one with a key waiting. She wanted you to open them. That's why she left the keys. Lily stood in the doorway, her small face solemn. In the stories, this is where the princess finds out she was rich and all along. She just didn't know it yet. Sarah approached the nearest box, number 1, according to the engraving on its door. She turned the small brass key and the door swung open. Inside was a leather portfolio. She carried it to the table and opened it under her flashlight beam. Bearer bonds, dozens of them, each worth $10,000, issued by the United States Treasury between 1975 and 2005. Sarah counted quickly, her hands shaking so badly she had to count twice. 200 bonds, $2 million in this single box. Danny came to stand beside her, his voice cracked. Are those real? They look real. The paper felt substantial. Official seals and serial numbers and printing that would be hard to fake. They're in a vault. They're organized. They have to be real. Box 2 held more bonds, these from private corporations. IBM, General Electric, Apple Computer from their early days, purchased when the company was still finding its footing. Another $1 million at minimum, probably more depending on current values. Box 3 was filled with stock certificates, the old-fashioned paper kind that companies stopped issuing in the early 2000s. Coca-Cola, Microsoft, Amazon, all purchased decades ago when prices were low, before anyone knew these companies would become titans. Sarah couldn't even begin to calculate their current worth. Box 4 held gold coins, each in its own protective case. American Eagles, Canadian Maple Leafs, South African Krugerrands, hundreds of them glinting in the flashlight beam like captured stars. Sarah's legs gave out and she sat down hard on the concrete floor. This isn't possible. This doesn't happen to people like me. But Danny had found Eleanor's journal again. He flipped through pages, scanning quickly. Mom, listen to this. This is from January 2001. He read aloud. Kenny called me into his office today and said he was making me a partner, not in his music, but in his investments. He said I'd been managing his household finances for 29 years, and I'd saved him more money than any accountant ever had. He said he was giving me 10% of everything he made from his real estate investments going forward. I told him it was too much. He told me to shut up and sign the papers. I signed, I cried. He hugged me and said, Lorraine, you're the only person in my life who never asked for anything. It's about time someone gave you everything. Sarah pressed her hands to her face. 10% of Kenny Rogers' real estate investments, compounded over 25 years. The number would be incomprehensible. They opened box after box in a daze. More stocks, more bonds, more gold. Jewelry that belonged in museums, diamond necklaces with stones the size of grapes, Emerald earrings set in platinum, ruby bracelets that looked like liquid fire, documents showing ownership stakes in various businesses, intellectual property rights to songs Eleanor had apparently co-written, her contributions uncredited but now legally documented, real estate deeds for commercial buildings in Atlanta, residential properties in Nashville, undeveloped land scattered across Tennessee and Kentucky. By the time they reached Box 32, the last one, Sarah felt like she was floating outside her own body. This couldn't be happening. People who worked 3 jobs and worried about electricity bills didn't inherit fortunes. They inherited debt and struggle, and maybe, if they were lucky, a few $1,000s to ease the burden. Box 32 contained a single envelope sealed with wax, marked "Read this last" in Eleanor's handwriting. Sarah's hands shook so badly that Lily had to help her break the seal. Inside was a letter dated October 1st, 2 days before Eleanor died. My dearest Sarah, if you're reading this, you've opened all the boxes. You've seen what I built from scraps and luck and one man's generosity. The total value is approximately $287 million. Yes, you read that correctly. $287 million. I know this seems impossible. I know you're scared and confused, but understand this. Every penny is legal. Every investment is documented. Every asset has a paper trail. Kenny's lawyers helped me set up everything properly. The taxes are paid. The records are clean. This is yours, free and clear. Sarah stopped breathing. Danny had gone pale. Lily looked confused, like the number was too big to mean anything. But money isn't why I'm writing this letter. Eleanor's words continued. I'm writing to tell you that I stayed in this house for 53 years, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. Kenny gave me family when mine fell apart. He gave me purpose when I felt worthless. He gave me respect when the world saw me as just a housekeeper. I earned this fortune, but I earned something more valuable too, dignity. I pray you use this money to find your own dignity, to stop breaking your back for pennies, to give Danny and Lily opportunities I could never give your mother, to be free from the kind of poverty that steals dreams and crushes spirits. But more than that, I pray you remember where it came from. It came from loyalty, from showing up every day, from doing the invisible work that makes other people's lives possible, from being excellent at something the world thinks is beneath excellence. You are my granddaughter. You carry my blood. I know you have that same excellence in you. Use this fortune to build something that matters. Don't waste it. Don't hide it. Don't let it make you someone you're not. Let it make you more of who you already are. I love you, Sarah. I always loved you. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you in person, but maybe this is better. Maybe this way you will believe it. Your grandmother, Eleanor Mitchell. Sarah collapsed onto the floor, her body racked with sobs that felt like they were tearing her apart from the inside. Danny knelt beside her and wrapped his arms around her shoulders. Lily pressed against her other side, crying too, even though she probably didn't understand what was happening, just knew that her mother needed her. They stayed that way for a long time in a vault filled with more money than Sarah could comprehend, grieving for a woman they'd barely known, but who had loved them with a fierceness that transcended absence and time and all the years that had been stolen from them. When Sarah could finally breathe again, when the sobs had subsided to occasional hitching gasps, she looked at her children. What do we do? What the hell do we do? Danny's voice was steady despite the tears on his face. We call that lawyer. We tell him what we found. What if he tries to take it? What if, Mom? Danny gripped her shoulders. Grandma said it was documented. She said it was legal. We need professionals to help us navigate this. But first, we need to photograph everything. He was right. Sarah knew he was right, but the fear had already started. The certainty that something this good couldn't possibly last, that any moment someone would arrive and explain that this was all a mistake, that the fortune belonged to someone else, that people like Sarah Mitchell from Nashville, who cleaned toilets for a living, didn't get to keep $287 million. They spent the next 3 hours methodically photographing every bond, every stock certificate, every piece of jewelry. Danny created a spreadsheet on his phone, cataloging everything they found. By the time they finished, the sun had moved across the sky and afternoon light slanted through the library windows, in golden shafts that made the dust motes dance. Sarah locked the inner vault, then the outer one. They pushed the bookcase back into place and the hidden door disappeared seamlessly into the wall. Just another section of built-in shelving in an old mansion's library. They drove away from the property in silence, too overwhelmed to speak. Sarah's mind kept returning to that number, 287 million, trying to make it feel real, trying to understand what it meant. She could pay off every debt, buy a house with a yurt and bedrooms for both kids, send Danny and Lily to any college in the world, quit all 3 jobs, just breathe without calculating whether she had enough money to make it through the week. But underneath the euphoria was something darker. This much money came with danger. People killed for far less. The wrong person finding out about this could destroy them. They stopped at a hotel 30 miles from Fitzgerald, someplace anonymous and cheap where Sarah could think without the weight of the mansion pressing down on her. While Danny and Lily watched television in the room, Sarah sat in the parking lot in the rental car and called Thomas Bradford. Her voice shook. "Mr. Bradford, it's Sarah Mitchell. I need to see you, today if possible. It's urgent." The pause on the other end stretched long enough that Sarah wondered if the call had dropped. Then his measured voice. "Is everything all right with the property?" "The property is fine. It's what's inside the property that we need to discuss, in person, privately." Another pause. "I can clear my afternoon. 2 o'clock? I'll be there." The drive to Atlanta took 90 minutes. Sarah left Danny and Lily at the hotel with money for vending machines and strict instructions not to open the door for anyone. Bradford's office occupied the 3rd floor of a historic building downtown, all marble and dark wood and the kind of understated wealth that didn't need to announce itself. The receptionist led Sarah to a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Bradford entered moments later, closing the door behind him with a quiet click that somehow felt ominous. He was exactly what Sarah had expected from their phone conversations. Early 60s, gray hair perfectly trimmed, suit that cost more than Sarah made in a month. His handshake was firm, but his eyes were kind. "Miss Mitchell, you sounded distressed on the phone. What's happened?" Sarah pulled the folder from her bag and slid it across the polished table. Inside were printouts of the photos they'd taken, organized by category. Property deeds, insurance policies, bearer bonds, stock certificates, gold, jewelry, real estate holdings, and Eleanor's final letter, carefully preserved in a plastic sleeve. Bradford opened the folder. His expression remained neutral for the first few pages. Then his eyebrows rose slightly. Then his mouth opened just enough to show surprise. By the time he reached Eleanor's letter, his hands had started to shake. He looked up at Sarah with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Dear God, I had no idea. Eleanor never told me about any of this. So it's real." Sarah's voice cracked. "It's legal?" Bradford's training reasserted itself. He straightened in his chair, composed his features back into professional neutrality. "If these documents are authentic, and I have no reason to believe they're not, then yes, it's very real, and yes, it's legal. Kenny Rogers' estate was settled years ago. These assets were already separated, already transferred to Eleanor during his lifetime. They're not part of his estate, they're part of hers, which means they're now part of yours." The room tilted. Sarah gripped the edge of the table. $287 million, at least. Bradford flipped back through the photos. Some of these stocks have split multiple times since purchase. The real estate has appreciated significantly. The jewelry alone could be worth tens of millions depending on quality and provenance. He closed the folder carefully, like it might explode. "Miss Mitchell, you're not just wealthy, you're one of the wealthiest women in Georgia." The words didn't make sense. Sarah heard them but couldn't process them into meaning. What do I do? How do I even begin to handle something like this? Bradford stood and walked to the windows, hands clasped behind his back. "First, we need to verify everything. Every bond, every certificate, every deed. We'll need specialists, appraisers, accountants, tax attorneys. This will take months to fully catalog and assess." He turned back to face her. "Second, we need to keep this quiet. The moment word gets out, you'll be inundated. Family members you've never met, investment advisors promising guaranteed returns, charities with compelling causes, not to mention criminals who might see you as a target." Sarah's stomach dropped. "Are we in danger?" "Not immediately. But wealth of this magnitude requires security, personal security, digital security, legal security. Bradford returned to his seat. I need to ask you something, Miss Mitchell. Are you prepared for what comes next? Because once we begin this process, your life will never be the same. Everything changes. Everything. Sarah thought about the apartment in Nashville with its broken heater and thin walls. Thought about Richard Voss and his smug face and his certainty that people like her stayed in their place. Thought about Lily pretending her dollar store birthday was the best ever. Thought about Danny wanting to quit school to work at a grocery store. Thought about Eleanor spending 53 years building this fortune quietly, waiting for the day it could set someone free. I'm prepared. Her voice came out stronger than she felt. Tell me what we need to do. Bradford pulled out a legal pad and began making notes. Over the next 2 weeks, they assembled a team. Patricia Zhang, a forensic accountant who verified every financial instrument with methodical precision. Gerald Moss, an estate attorney who confirmed the legal transfer of assets and made Sarah feel slightly queasy with his oily smile and too firm handshake. Robert Hayes, a private security consultant and former FBI agent who made Sarah feel simultaneously safer and more paranoid. They worked in secret, meeting in Bradford's office after hours, communicating through encrypted emails. The bonds were authentic, the stocks were real, the jewelry was genuine. Every single item in those vault boxes was exactly what it appeared to be. The total value after proper assessment and accounting for appreciation came to $287 million. Sometimes Patricia would say the number out loud during their meetings, and Sarah would have to leave the room to breathe, to press her hands against the cool marble walls in the hallway and remind herself this was real. This was happening. This was her life now. They kept everything quiet. Sarah returned to Nashville and went back to work at all 3 jobs because stopping would raise questions. Danny and Lily went back to school. They moved through their days like sleepwalkers, carrying a secret too big to process, pretending nothing had changed while everything had changed. The secrecy lasted exactly 16 days. Sarah was at the grocery store buying generic brands out of habit when her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. The woman's voice was professional but breathless. Is this Sarah Mitchell? Who's asking? My name is Jennifer Holt. I'm a reporter with the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. I'd like to ask you a few questions about the estate you inherited from Eleanor Mitchell and its connection to Kenny Rogers. Sarah's blood turned to ice. I have no comment. Miss Mitchell, we're running a story tomorrow about a substantial inheritance linked to Kenny Rogers' estate. We've confirmed through public records that you're the sole heir to Eleanor Mitchell's assets. We'd like to give you an opportunity to tell your side before we publish. How did you find out about this? Property records are public, Miss Mitchell. Your grandmother's will was filed with the probate court. Once we started digging, the connections became clear. We've been working on this story for a week. Sarah hung up without another word. Her hands shook so badly she had to lean against her shopping cart for support. She called Bradford immediately. His curse was the first unprofessional thing she'd ever heard from him. Get to my office now. Don't talk to anyone. No reporters, no neighbors, no one. No? The article hit the internet that night. Mystery heir inherits country legend's hidden estate. Kenny Rogers' housekeeper's granddaughter receives mansion and unknown fortune. The story was mostly speculation. They didn't know about the vault or the true value, but they knew enough. Within hours, Sarah's phone exploded with calls and texts from numbers she didn't recognize. Her social media accounts, barely used, filled with friend requests and messages. Reporters appeared at her apartment building, camping in the parking lot with cameras and microphones. Then came the threats. An email claiming to be from Kenny Rogers' second cousin. That money rightfully belongs to Kenny's family. Your grandmother stole from him for years. We'll see you in court. A Facebook message. You don't deserve this. You didn't work for it. People like you are why this country is falling apart. A voicemail, slurred and angry. You better watch your back. Money like that gets people killed. Robert Hayes moved them to a hotel under assumed names that night. He installed security systems at their apartment and arranged for 24-hour surveillance. His voice was calm but firm when he explained that they were now targets for everything from lawsuits to kidnapping, that this was temporary but necessary, that once things settled, they'd establish proper protocols, but right now they needed to stay invisible. Sarah sat in an anonymous hotel room, watching news coverage of her own life on television, and felt the fortune that was supposed to free her closing around her throat like a noose. The lawsuit arrived on day 3 of the media circus. Kenny Rogers' adult children from previous marriages filed a claim arguing their father had been unduly influenced, that Eleanor's transfer of assets constituted theft disguised as legitimate business dealings. Their attorney was Victor Harrington, a man who wore expensive suits like armor and spoke in the measured tones of someone who'd spent decades weaponizing the law against people who couldn't afford to fight back. His press conference played on every news channel. My client's father was vulnerable in his later years. We have evidence this so-called housekeeper manipulated him into transferring assets rightfully belonging to his biological children. We're not just seeking return of the estate. We're investigating whether criminal charges are warranted against the Mitchell family. The racist undertones weren't subtle. Immigrant housekeeper. So-called. Manipulated. Every word chosen to paint Eleanor as a scheming outsider who'd taken advantage of an American icon. Sarah watched from the hotel room with Danny and Lily pressed against her sides. The television made Victor Harrington look even more predatory than he probably was in person, all sharp angles and calculated expressions. Christine Rogers stood beside him, Kenny's daughter, 58 years old, with her father's eyes and none of his warmth. Lily's voice was small. "That man is lying about great-grandma, isn't he?" "Yes, baby, he's lying, but people will believe him." Danny's observation carried the weight of someone who'd already learned how the world worked, how money and lawyers and media narratives could reshape truth into whatever shape served power. Bradford called that evening. His voice was tight with controlled anger. "The claim is baseless. I can prove with timestamps and documentation that everything was done legally and transparently. But it ties up your assets, creates headlines, puts pressure on you to settle." "I'm not settling." "Good. Because Victor Harrington is known for this. He doesn't care about justice. He cares about forcing settlements from defendants who can't afford prolonged litigation. But you can't afford it now. We're going to fight." Additional lawsuits piled up like snow in a blizzard. A man claiming to be Eleanor's nephew from her first marriage demanding his share of family money. A woman supposedly a distant cousin filing paperwork that claims Sarah wasn't actually Eleanor's granddaughter, demanding DNA tests and discovery. Every financial transaction Sarah had ever made suddenly became newsworthy. The bankruptcy she'd filed after Rita's cancer treatment, medical bills that had drowned her even as her mother died, got spun into evidence of poor judgment and financial irresponsibility. People from Sarah's past emerged like ghosts. Her mother's old friends who'd never called after the funeral. Distant relatives she'd met once at a wedding 15 years ago. Former neighbors who suddenly remembered their close relationship with the Mitchell family. All of them with hands out, stories ready, needs that only Sarah's fortune could solve. 2 months after the inheritance became public, Sarah sat in a safe house Robert Hayes had arranged in, a gated community with private security and enough distance from Nashville that reporters hadn't found them yet. Danny had enrolled in online school. Lily did her homework at the kitchen table with a security guard visible through the window. They lived like prisoners in a comfortable cage, and the walls kept getting smaller. Danny brought it up over dinner one night, his voice careful. "Mom, how long are we going to live like this? Until things calm down. When will that be?" Sarah had no answer. Robert Hayes had explained that the threats would continue regardless, that bad people now knew she'd had the fortune even if she gave it away, that wealthy people lived with security as a permanent condition. But Sarah kept thinking about Eleanor's journal entry, the one from 2018 that she'd found during a sleepless night of rereading everything. "Sometimes I wonder if this fortune is blessing or curse. I've given Sarah financial security. She'll never have to worry about money again. But I've also given her burden of being target, of never knowing who's genuine, of raising children in Goldfish Bowl. If I could go back, would I still do it? I don't know. I hope she forgives me." Lily had nightmares 3 nights a week now. She'd wake up crying about bad men coming through the windows, about people taking her mother away, about losing everything again. Sarah would hold her and whisper promises she wasn't sure she could keep. And in the morning, they'd all pretend to be fine while the security detail changed shifts outside. The CBS interview came 4 months after the article broke. Sarah had resisted media appearances, but Bradford convinced her that controlling the narrative was better than letting others define her story. The journalist was Diane Morrison, respected and fair, someone who wouldn't sensationalize. They filmed in Atlanta at a neutral studio. Sarah wore clothes she'd bought specifically for the interview, the first new clothes she'd purchased in 2 years that weren't from a thrift store, and tried not to think about what Richard Voss would say if he saw her on television talking about inheriting millions while he was still supervising warehouse workers. Diane's questions were direct but not cruel. Sarah talked about Eleanor, about the estrangement, about finding the mansion and discovering the vault. She described Eleanor's final letter and Kenny Rogers' generosity and the legal documentation proving everything was legitimate. "What will you do with this fortune?" Diane leaned forward, slightly, genuinely curious. Sarah had rehearsed this answer with Bradford's media consultants. "I'm going to honor my grandmother's legacy and Kenny Rogers' generosity. I'm establishing a foundation to help working people, especially single mothers, get ahead, not through handouts but through opportunity. Education assistance, housing support, small business loans. My grandmother spent her life making someone else's life easier. I want to spend mine doing the same for others. And the mansion? I'm turning it into a museum where people can learn about Kenny Rogers' life and music, but also a place that honors the invisible workers who make great lives possible. The housekeepers, the assistants, the people behind the scenes. My grandmother's story matters. Stories like hers matter." The interview changed the tone of coverage. The frivolous lawsuits started falling apart as public opinion shifted. Kenny Rogers' children, facing backlash for their legal challenge, quietly dropped their claim and issued a statement supporting Sarah's plans. Christine Rogers' name appeared in the statement, but Sarah noticed she didn't speak at any press conferences afterward, disappearing from the narrative as quickly as she'd entered it. But the pressure didn't disappear. It just changed shape. Sarah had begun working with Bradford's team to establish the Kenny Rogers Heritage Foundation. They'd structured it carefully: endowment of $75 million, board of directors including Patricia Zhang and several nonprofit veterans, strict oversight protocols. The first initiative was the Single Parent Scholarship Fund, full rides to vocational training or college plus stipends for childcare and living expenses. 8,000 applications arrived within 3 weeks. Sarah read every single one in the safe house while Danny did homework and Lily drew pictures. Each application was a mirror of her own life. Mothers working night shifts, fathers juggling multiple jobs, parents who'd postponed dreams for years or decades to keep their children fed. The selection committee chose the first 200 recipients. Sarah called each one personally. The pattern never varied. She'd explain who she was and that they'd been selected. There would be silence, then sobbing. Every single time, sobbing. One woman, Jasmine, nursing student with twin boys, could barely speak through her tears. "This is real? You're sure this is real? It's real. We're going to cover your tuition, your books, your childcare. You're going to get your degree, Jasmine. You're going to build the life you've been working toward. I don't know what to say. Thank you. Thank you. Oh my God, thank you. Just promise me you'll remember how this feels. Someday when you're able, help someone else who's where you are now. I promise. I swear I promise." Those calls sustained Sarah through the exhaustion and paranoia and constant vigilance. They reminded her why the money mattered, why Eleanor had built this fortune and passed it on. But they couldn't fix what was breaking inside her family. Danny turned 17 and announced he'd been accepted to Harvard, Yale, and Stanford. Full rides to any of them through a foundation scholarship for employees' families. He also got into University of Tennessee. Sarah was folding laundry when he told her his choice. "UT, I'm going to UT." She stopped mid-fold. "Baby, you got into Harvard." "Why would you?" "Because at Harvard, I'm always the heir to $287 million. That's all anyone will see." Her hands tightened on the towel she was holding. "At UT, I can be a regular student, make real friends, have a normal experience. Plus, it's closer to home. I don't want to leave you and Lily alone with all this." "You're giving up Harvard for normal?" His jaw set in that familiar way. "Normal is worth more than Ivy League. You taught me that." Sarah sat down hard on the couch. She thought the money would give her children opportunities. Instead, it was taking them away. That night, after Danny and Lily were asleep, Sarah pulled out Eleanor's journal and read it cover to cover for the 20th time. She found the entry from December 2020 that she'd underlined during a previous reading. "I've kept this house beautiful for 53 years, but it's just a building. Buildings don't matter. People matter. If I could trade this entire mansion to help one struggling mother feed her children, I'd do it in a heartbeat." Sarah closed the journal and stared at the ceiling of the safe house and let herself ask the question she'd been avoiding for months. What if keeping the fortune was the wrong choice? What if Eleanor had given her this money not to keep but to learn from, to understand something fundamental about wealth and worth and what actually mattered? The Foundation's board meeting the next week forced the question into sharp relief. Architects had assessed the mansion. Repairs would cost $8 to $12 million minimum. Full museum conversion another $5 to $7 million. Annual maintenance and operating costs $2 to $3 million. Total investment $25 million to launch, $40 to $50 million over 10 years. Patricia Zhang presented the alternative numbers with her characteristic precision. If you sold the mansion instead and used those proceeds for the foundation, you could help 5,000 more families over the same period. Scholarship fund could grow from 200 to 2,000 recipients annually. Housing initiative could help 500 families buy homes instead of 50. The numbers were brutal in their clarity. Keep the mansion as a personal legacy or sell it to maximize impact. Sarah's voice felt small in the conference room. The mansion is my only physical connection to a grandmother I never knew. Selling it feels like erasing her. One of the board members, a former single mother named Patricia, who'd built a successful career after 20 years of struggle, spoke gently. But keeping it when you could help 5,000 more families, isn't that erasing Eleanor's true purpose? She spent 53 years caring for others. Would she want a building or would she want impact? The question sat in Sarah's chest like a stone. She thought about it while reviewing scholarship applications. She thought about it while talking to Danny about college. She thought about it while Lily had nightmares and Sarah held her and promised safety she wasn't sure she could deliver. 6 months after the inheritance became public, the foundation was running smoothly, but Sarah felt like she was drowning. The lawsuits had been defeated, but new ones kept appearing. The security was necessary, but suffocating. Danny was sacrificing Harvard. Lily couldn't have friends over to play. And Sarah couldn't remember the last time she'd gone grocery shopping without a security detail, couldn't recall what it felt like to trust that someone talking to her actually liked her rather than liked her money. The betrayal came from inside. Gerald Moss, the estate attorney who'd been part of Bradford's team from the beginning, had seemed competent, if slightly oily. His handshake was too firm, and his smile showed too many teeth, but his work was solid and his advice sound. Sarah had trusted him because Bradford vouched for him, because he'd helped structure the foundation, because he'd been there through the worst of the media circus. The anonymous envelope arrived at the foundation office on a Tuesday morning. No return address, postmarked locally. Inside were bank statements showing foundation money being diverted to suspicious accounts. $2.3 million transferred to shell companies over 4 months. Someone was embezzling from the foundation meant to help struggling families. Patricia traced the transactions with forensic precision. The money had been routed through 3 different banks, layered and obscured, but one account name was visible: G. Moss Consulting. The confrontation happened in Bradford's conference room. Gerald arrived confident, discussing foundation progress and upcoming initiatives. Bradford slid the bank statements across the table without preamble. "Can you explain these transfers?" Gerald's face drained of color. "Those are legitimate consulting fees. $2.3 million in consulting fees over 4 months?" Gerald stood up like he might run. Bradford's voice cut through the movement like a blade. "Sit down, Gerald. We're calling the police." Under pressure, Gerald collapsed into confession: gambling addiction, debts to dangerous people. He'd thought he could borrow the money, win it back, return it before anyone noticed. But he kept losing, kept taking more. The apologies came in broken fragments between attempts to explain, to justify, to make it somehow less terrible than it was. Sarah sat across from him, feeling something cold and hard settle in her stomach. "You stole from families like mine, from people who need this help desperately. That money was supposed to send single mothers to college. You stole their futures. Gerald went to prison. The FBI recovered 1.4 million, but 900,000 was gone, paid to loan sharks who disappeared into whatever holes criminals crawl into. The foundation survived. Sarah's personal wealth could absorb the loss, but the damage to trust went deeper than dollars. The media coverage was vicious. Foundation attorney embezzles 2.3 M bars. Is Rogers Foundation mismanaged? Donors withdrew. Scholarship applicants questioned whether their money would be safe. Sarah had to rebuild trust from nothing, implementing radical transparency. All financials published online monthly, independent audits quarterly, board meetings live-streamed. The work was exhausting. Sarah functioned on 4 hours of sleep, managing the foundation by day, and lying awake at night wondering what other betrayals were waiting. Who else would reveal themselves as someone who saw her fortune as an opportunity rather than a responsibility? 8 months after inheriting $287 million, Sarah Mitchell sat in a hotel room at 3 in the morning and calculated how much money she actually needed to live. Not to survive. She'd spent her whole life surviving. To live. To be secure. To give Danny and Lily good educations and a comfortable home and opportunities without making them targets. To do the foundation work without the constant fear that came with being one of the wealthiest women in Georgia. The number wasn't 287 million. It wasn't even 50 million. The number was something manageable, something that generated enough passive income to support her family and fund the work she cared about without making them pray. She called an emergency meeting with Bradford, Patricia, and Robert Hayes. Her voice was steady when she told them her decision. I want to give most of it away, not through the foundation over time, directly now. Keep enough to live comfortably. 10 million for me, 10 million in trust for Danny that he can't access until he's 30, 10 million for Lily, same terms. The rest, $267 million, goes to the foundation immediately. The shock in the room was palpable. Bradford found his voice first. Sarah, that's generational wealth. You'd be giving up security for your children's children. I don't want generational wealth. I want my son to go to college without being defined by money. I want my daughter to have friends who like her for who she is. I want to sleep without a security detail outside my door and go to the grocery store without wondering if someone's going to follow me home. Her hands were shaking, but her voice stayed firm. I want to be Sarah Mitchell, not Sarah Mitchell, the heiress. Patricia leaned forward. Threats will continue regardless. Bad people know you had the fortune. But if it's all in the foundation, I'm not worth kidnapping. I'm just an administrator. Replaceable. Robert started to object, but Sarah cut him off. Danny supports this. We talked about it last night. He said he'd rather have a normal life than millions of dollars he's afraid to spend. Bradford's legal training reasserted itself. If this is truly what you want, we can structure it. But you need to be certain. This isn't reversible. I'm certain. Sarah pulled out the folder she prepared, pages filled with her handwriting, outlining exactly how she wanted the money distributed. Eleanor wrote that she wanted this fortune to free me the way it could never free her. I finally understand what she meant. She couldn't give it away during her life. She had reasons, obligations, circumstances. But I can. And I'm choosing to do what she wished she could have done. The press conference was scheduled for 2 weeks later to give Bradford time to structure everything legally. Sarah used those 2 weeks to make peace with her decision, to sit with the fear that she was making a catastrophic mistake, to let herself grieve for the security she was giving up, and then accept that she was trading one kind of security for another. Diane Morrison agreed to moderate the press conference, held at what had been the mansion and was now the Fitzgerald Community Center. The town had purchased the property as a historical landmark, converting it to mixed-use space, part museum with Eleanor's preserved wing, part community center, part event venue. $7.2 million that would help 10,000 families instead of creating a monument to one woman's life. The room was packed. National media, local community members, foundation board, scholarship recipients, people whose lives had been changed by Eleanor's fortune filtered through Sarah's decisions. Sarah stood at the podium and felt her heart hammering, but her voice came out steady. 2 years ago, I inherited $287 million from a grandmother I barely knew. It was supposed to free me from poverty, give my children opportunities, honor Eleanor Mitchell's legacy. And in many ways it did those things. I no longer worry about rent. Danny and Lily have education secured. Eleanor's story is known. She paused, gathering herself. But I've also learned that massive wealth comes with massive calm. My son can't trust anyone his age because they might want his money. My daughter can't have normal friendships. I've been robbed, blackmailed, betrayed by people I trusted. I've watched criminals go to prison because they wanted what I have. And I've asked myself, is this what Eleanor wanted for me? The room was silent except for the click of camera shutters. Today, I'm announcing that I'm transferring $267 million directly to the Kenny Rogers Heritage Foundation. I'm keeping $30 million total, $10 million for myself, $10 million in trust for each of my children. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Sarah kept going, her voice gaining strength. With a $267 million endowment, the foundation can help 50,000 families over the next decade, 50,000 scholarships, 10,000 home purchases, 15,000 small business loans. That's Eleanor's real legacy. Not the dollar amount, the impact. She gripped the podium, leaning into the microphones. I don't need $287 million to live well. What I need is freedom. Freedom from fear. Freedom to trust people. Freedom for my children to have normal lives. Eleanor wrote in her journal, "Let it free you the way it could never free me." She couldn't give it away during her life. She had obligations, circumstances. But I can, and I'm choosing freedom over fortune. Patricia presented the foundation's expanded scope. It would become one of the top 50 charitable foundations in America, serve families in all 50 states, change lives on a scale that a museum or a personal fortune never could. Then Danny asked to speak. Sarah hadn't known he planned this. He walked to the podium at 17 years old, looking both terrified and determined. I'm going to UT instead of Harvard because I don't want to be defined by money. When Mom told me her plan, I was relieved. Because being rich made me a target, not a person. Grandma Eleanor spent 53 years being excellent at work the world thought was beneath excellence. That's who I want to be like. Not a rich kid, an excellent person. Lily spoke too, now 11, reading from notes she'd written carefully. Great-grandma wrote that people are treasure, not money. In stories, heroes always give things away. That's how you know they're heroes. My mom is a hero. The applause lasted long enough that Sarah felt tears running down her face. She hadn't cried in public since the inheritance became news, but she couldn't stop now, couldn't hide behind composure when her children had just validated the hardest decision she'd ever made. 1 year later, Sarah woke up at 6:30 in a house she'd bought for $350,000 in a normal Nashville neighborhood. No security detail outside, no reporters in the driveway. Just birds singing and a neighbor's dog barking and the sound of Danny and Lily arguing about something in the kitchen. She made coffee and sat on the porch watching sunrise paint the sky and thought about the journey from 4:30 alarm clocks and warehouse humiliation to this moment of simple peace. The foundation had helped 5,000 families in its first year. Danny was thriving at UT with real friends who didn't know or care about his family's history. Lily had sleepovers with girls from school who liked her for her terrible jokes and her kindness, not for money she didn't have access to. Sarah worked as the foundation's executive director, salary of $120,000 a year that she'd insisted on keeping at market rate. She walked to the office 3 blocks away every morning without bodyguards or fear. The $10 million she'd kept generated enough passive income that she'd never have to worry about electricity bills or birthday cakes from boxes, but not so much that she couldn't still feel human, still relate to the people the foundation served, still remember where she'd come from. Her phone rang, Danny calling from campus. "Hey, Mom, made Dean's list." The pride that flooded through her was pure and uncomplicated. "I'm so proud of you, baby." She hung up and sat with that feeling, proud of her son who'd earned recognition through his own work, not through money or connections or anything except dedication. That was worth more than any inheritance. Bradford had asked her once, months after the press conference, whether she regretted giving away $267 million. Sarah had thought about it seriously before answering. "I regret that Eleanor felt she couldn't give it away during her life. I regret all the years we lost because of my mother's pride." But giving away the money? No. That freed me in ways keeping it never could have. Now sitting on her porch watching her neighborhood wake up, Sarah pulled out her phone and opened the document she'd been working on for months. A letter to Eleanor that she'd never send, never share, just needed to write. Dear Grandma Eleanor, it took me 3 years to understand your gift. You didn't give me $287 million to keep. You gave it to me to learn from. You taught me that loyalty matters, that invisible work has value, that excellence is its own reward. But most importantly, you taught me that wealth without purpose is prison, and giving without strings is freedom. I've given away most of the money. I hope that doesn't disappoint you. The foundation has helped 50,000 families in 3 years. Danny is studying social entrepreneurship. Lily wants to be a teacher. We're all building lives that matter. I finally understand why you couldn't tell me you love me in person. You were showing me through sacrifice, through 53 years of excellent work, through building something that would free me not from poverty, but for choice. I love you, Grandma. Thank you for the real inheritance. Not the money, but the meaning. Your granddaughter, Sarah. She saved the document and put her phone away. Inside the house, she could hear Lily laughing at something Danny said. Normal sounds from a normal morning in a normal life that had required giving away a fortune to achieve. Sarah stood and went inside to make breakfast. Her kitchen was modest, but hers. Her children were happy and safe and becoming themselves without the weight of wealth defining them. The foundation was changing lives every day. Eleanor's story was known and honored. And Sarah Mitchell, who'd once cleaned toilets for people who made more in a week than she made in a year, had learned that the measure of wealth isn't what you have, but what you give. Not the treasure you accumulate, but the people you treasure. Not the fortune you inherit, but the freedom you choose. She'd inherited $287 million and given away $267 million, and somehow in the mathematics of that transaction, she'd become richer than she'd ever imagined possible.